Hello everyone, and welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. Today we're going to look at these passages from the Exalted Treatise. It's really captures the end of one section and the start of the other. So administer excessive punishment, aggravate executions with rage. That's the first part of what we're going to look at today. And these sentences basically conclude the section relating to sort of misconduct or misdeeds that were traditionally related to officials, government officials. These are people in positions of power. They could, as you can see from the wording, be able to determine sentencing in criminal matters and administer disciplinary measures and punishments. Let's take a closer look at the wording here. There are 4 characters to the first part, and if we were to consider defining them literally, it means to treat something that's light or relatively inconsequential, less serious, a matter that's not very grave, as something substantial, weighty, and serious. So, and hence it's being translated as administer excessive punishment. So it'd be relating to a government official who would possibly be inflating the whatever offences that had taken place, such that the poor accused person, must suffer, the penalties and the punishments that are perhaps much harsher than what you would normally expect. So what would be fair? So these are clearly sign and symptom of irresponsibility on the part of these government officials. But obviously that was in the times past. We're talking about pre-modern China. Today, this sort of instruction to be mindful of the sort of misdeed is equally applies to anyone who is in a position to determine cases of disciplinary matters, and right through to judges who have to sentence criminal cases and ultimately decide matters, civil matters included. So why would this sort of instruction be in the Exalted Treatise? It really alerts us to a general tendency, I suppose, among human beings, that the tendency to judge others very quickly and more harshly than perhaps a person might judge themselves. So quick to judge, less quick to forgive, and certainly judging others more harshly. And so hence we're cautioned against treating something that is relatively trivial, minor, as completely disproportionately. In one of the 5 classics known as the documents, classical documents, we have one of the most legendary emperors in the earliest periods of China's history, King Xuan. And we have this sentence here, where one of his close ministers is praising the king for doing the right thing. So in case of doubtful crimes where maybe we don't have all of the evidence, it's not very clear, well, you, as the king, you deal with these leniently, lightly, trying to take all matters into consideration and to err on the side of caution, as we might say. And this is coming from the classic of documents, one of the 5 classics that were associated with Confucian learning for centuries. In criminal law, this certainly resonates with criminal law in sort of Commonwealth countries, where you might have heard of Blackstone's ratio. Blackstone, Sir William Blackstone, was an English jurist. He was a statesman and a legal commentator as well. In fact, he wrote commentaries on the laws of England, that became sort of bestseller and source of authority internationally. And he's well known for this sort of maxim here, where his sort of commentating on matters of very serious offences, felonies. So this would be crimes like murder, for example. Well, all presumptive evidence of felony should be admitted cautiously, because the law holds that it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent suffer. So that's the underlying principle, if you like, behind taking a very cautious approach and always a very considered approach in terms of judging others, particularly in matters of the most serious criminal offences. And hence, in criminal law, you find that the state, the prosecution, is faced with the most onerous burden of proof. They have to prove their case that the accused did commit all the elements of the accused offence, the relevant offence or offences, on the basis of to the extent of beyond reasonable doubt. So that's the criminal standard burden of proof. So and here we have a portrait of Sir William Blackstone, the English judge and statesman. Okay, so that's fairly clear. Administer excessive punishment. What about aggravate executions with rage? Well, as you can imagine, we look at the words, Look at the 4 Chinese characters here. Relates to seeing, witnessing a death, someone who is being sentenced to death, they're being executed, where that death penalty is being carried out. And what does that person do? They apply their anger. As we might say in English, adding insult to injury, or rubbing salt in the wound. And that is clearly another incident of misconduct or a misdeed that the Exalted Treatise would alert us to and warn against. A person who has been sentenced to death, you can think of, they've probably committed the worst offences. And many might say, well, they're deserving. They should suffer. It's their own fault for doing such terrible things in society. But why would the Exalted Treatise have the sort of caution here? It's very easy to judge somebody, especially if they've committed the worst, most terrible things. But in doing so, we lose a bit of our human compassion, the ability to commiserate, to show compassion to others, to people who are suffering hardship, and especially those who are about to lose their life. So we can sort of understand the rationale, not to alert ourselves, not to suppose, be angry or to make those sorts of matters worse with our own emotional reactions. And what happens when we don't do this? What happens if a person does the right thing? It's actually an anecdote that's collected in what's called the Garden of Eloquence. Now, we've come across this anthology before, and it was put together in the 1st century by Liu Xiang, who was a scholar official, who was a historian. And in the chapter on impartiality, we come across this particular historical account, and it relates to Zigao. And he is one of the students of Confucius. This is Zigao of the state of Wei. So he was there as a judge. I have on the right the translation. It's a fairly recent translation by Eric Henry. But when Zigao served as a judge in this particular state, he sentenced a man to have his feet cut off. Clearly, it was in relation to the corresponding crime. When the ruler and officers of Wei fell into disorder and he had to, try to flee, he got to as far as the outer gates of the city, but it was closed. The man whose feet had been cut off was keeping a guard at this gate. And the man tells him, look, there's a gap in the wall over there. You can still get away. But Zigao refuses to sneak past walls. He wants to go through the gate. Well, man said, well, actually points to another spot. There's a small hole in the wall over there. You can try and hide. So you can escape whoever's in hot pursuit of you. But Zigao also refuses. Says, man of quality doesn't creep through tunnels. He's done nothing wrong, obviously. But it's a bit of a state of chaos among the bureaucracy, and so he has to leave. Then the man goes, well, there's actually a house over there. Why don't you try and go there to hide? And Zigao goes into the house, and his pursuers, of course, they don't find him and abandon the search. So Zigao is able to escape and unharmed, unscathed. As he's about to leave, he questions the man. Because I was not able to overlook the king's laws, so, as a judge, I had to apply the law. I chopped your feet off with my own hands. Now that I'm in difficulties, you have a perfect opportunity to take revenge. Why are you allowing me to escape? Probably thinks, that poor man probably suffered such terrible punishment because of me. Why is he suddenly being so good to me? Why is he essentially saved my life? The man explains. The foot removal was the sentence I merited, said the mutilated man. We don't know his name. So he's saying that, it was fair punishment for what I'd done. There was nothing to be done about it. When you adjudicated my case, when you were the judge who determined my case, you considered all aspects of the laws, going over the circumstances from the beginning to the end, because you wanted me to be spared from the punishment. You wanted to try your best. I was aware of this. When the crime had been determined and the time came for the sentence to be pronounced, your gloom and unhappiness showed in your expression. So, unfortunately, it was an inevitable, unavoidable result, and you were also upset about this. That there wasn't anything else that could be done to spare me from this. this too I was aware of. It was certainly not from any personal feeling that you acted. Heaven plants compassion in the hearts of men. I'm certain that this was the case with you. And that is why I gave you the means to escape. So the man realized, even though he had suffered such a terrible punishment, he realized that he deserved that. And that was fair in the eyes of the law. The judge had been fair and impartial, tried their best to spare him from such punishment, and recognized that, well, the judge had been as compassionate as he could be. No hard feelings. When Confucius, Master Kong, Confucius, when he heard about this incident, Zhao, one of his students, lived at the same time, he said, one who is good at leading others plants virtue. So essentially modeling a good ethical example for others. Someone who is not good at leading, at governing others, plants resentment. Cannot Zhao be said to have acted out of concern for fairness? So Confucius recognizes that Zhao has been a fair government official, has been fair in his role as a judge in determining all of these matters. And you can clearly see he's been able to enjoy the good fortune from doing the right thing in his work and his duties to his fellow citizens. And that is, I think, a good story of what happens when you do the right thing. You don't administer excessive punishment. Okay. Or aggravate executions with rage. Obviously, there wasn't an execution in this particular instance. Okay. Now, we come to the next part, and that's sort of this passage here, refuse to correct faults, refrain from good deeds. It is actually the start of a fairly long passage, but it's, you would say, the final passage relating to all of the misdeeds that might be committed by the general public. And this passage sort of comes first because it provides the overriding principle. So chances are, if you failed to heed this warning, to follow, if you've refused to correct faults, refrain from the good deeds, then accumulating good deeds, then chances are you're likely to be in breach of many of the other instructions or cautions in the Exalted Treatise. So it's put it right at the beginning of this final section on these misdeeds. And this is actually a common principle that resonates with many of the world's religious and ethical traditions. Why is that? If we have a look at the characters more closely, we have the same character repeated at the same, at the start of both parts. It's the idea of knowing, recognizing, being aware. The next character relates to wrongdoing. And this is, at the time, it wasn't intentional or deliberate misconduct. But now that a person is aware of it, they don't change. They don't improve themselves. They don't correct their mistakes or faults. By the same token, they might be aware of good deeds. Too bad. The character Shun relates to the ethical. What is right and good? But the character here is they don't. So that helps, makes it more complete. if you know that a person knows that they've done something wrong, but they don't correct or change and improve, and by the same token, if they know that something is right, the right thing to do, but they don't follow through and carry it out. Hence, that's been translated as refuse to correct faults, refrain from good deeds. And if you reflect a little bit more, you'll realize that the central component or element is knowing the difference between right and wrong, knowing what is good ethical conduct and misconduct. That is, it boils down to not just knowing, but following through, either avoiding the misdeeds, misconducts, or applying oneself, carrying out, accumulating the good deeds that are bound to bring us good fortune. Then the question is, why is it that people don't bother to correct their wrongdoings? They obviously know about their faults. Why don't they correct themselves? Seems so easy. You already know. Isn't that 50% of you're obviously, if you don't know about something, that you've done something wrong, then you have no chance of actually trying to change and improve. But if you do know, surely that's half of the hard work already done. Or if you know that something is good, well, why not do so? Why not follow through? What's stopping a person from following through? Well, there are a few elements that I would suggest. At one level, you could say maybe they're not focused enough. Maybe they're distracted. Even though they're aware of the need to change their behaviors, maybe they're not diligent enough. Maybe they're shirking hard yards and ultimately not persevering. So sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. But the just shows that they haven't really committed to the relevant change. That's on one level. What about if we look a little bit deeper? I'll just stop presenting here. So we're still in the same passage. What would stop a person from changing their faults or to accumulate more good deeds? Seems positive. Why not do so? Well, sometimes it's a matter of self-interest. It takes effort. You have to maybe change some of the habits that have built up over months, years, do something that you're not used to. And that takes effort and time and level of commitment to that change. Sometimes you're up against core habits that sort of move us in the opposite direction altogether. That sometimes a person hesitates. They're worried. Is that really the right thing to do? They might procrastinate. Just of course I already know. I'll change later. Could be tomorrow. And therefore come up with all these excuses to avoid ultimately correcting their faults and accumulating the misdeeds. Venerable Master Chin Kung would tell us that what is the key? The key is to understand thoroughly. This knowing has to be thorough and complete. We have to know that whatever misdeeds, misconduct will actually lead to misfortunes. What sorts of misfortunes? Well, we have to be clear, and that can help move us in the right direction, help drive our change. By the same token, we have to know, well, of course, everyone would like to accumulate good deeds enjoy the good fortunes, but how? What sorts of good deeds? You can do a range of good deeds. What are some of the hardest to do? What are the ones that must be done? Now, I'll just share my screen again. Okay. I have a picture here of some ruins. Now, one time, Lord Huan, of the state of Qi, he was in power around the 5th century of obviously the state of Qi, one of the states in the spring and autumn period. But this is towards the late period of the Zhou dynasty, period that suffered much conflict as lots of these various feudal states sort of fought each other for supremacy. And Lord Huan was certainly one of the hegemons that emerged in this period of time of great conflict, increasing conflict. And one time he sort of encounters these ruins, what's left essentially of the Guo domain, a territory that had been governed by the Guo family sometime in the past. And he's quite curious because this was ruled by the Guo family in the past. How has it come to this? And somebody who has happened to be there told the Lord, well, yes, you're right. This was the state of, led by the Guo family in the past. The Lord says, well, how's it all come to this? It's terrible state of ruins. And the person replies, well, they admired the virtuous and they despised the despicable, the unvirtuous. Lord Huan sort of reflects on this and says, well, that sounds very, very good. What could possibly be wrong with that? We want to admire those who are good and virtuous, and try to emulate them, follow them, and obviously distance ourselves from the negative role models. So how did he get to be this? You can imagine he's all the more curious now. The Guo family seems to be doing the right things. Well, the man sort of gives him a few more details. Said, well, they admired the virtuous, but they could never adopt and practice that virtuous conduct. They despised the unvirtuous, but they could never rid themselves of their unvirtuous ways. So we start to get the idea of, it's just paying lip service to good models of good virtue, but not being able to follow through on either front. And so the man elaborates. So the ruler, the Guo ruler, he could praise the people of good character and outstanding abilities, but he never was able to appoint them to proper roles that, so that they could be able to contribute to the government, the society, to really do something for the people. Now, that's already terrible enough, but to make matters worse, the people that were appointed, they were undeserving. They didn't do their jobs. They were completely unworthy, and yet they were never dismissed or demoted. And so you can imagine how much the people had to suffer, the injustice of it all. And the ruler himself, his family, they were attacked. He lost his life. Obviously, he lost his state. And the people burnt the palace buildings right through to the ground. So, all that is left is a pile of rubble and ruin that we see. So it's been desolate ever since. And this is, I suppose, a stark reminder to Lord One of what he should do to be a good ruler, to be a strong ruler, and to really serve the people in his state, the state of tea. And you have, for us, it's a clear reminder that it's not enough to know about good deeds, the different types of good deeds, without committing ourselves to try and practice it. And the same applies to our mistakes. It's well and good to know about our mistakes and faults, but it doesn't come to very much if we just give ourselves excuses and delay ever making any change. Venerable Master Jinkul would say, then there's really not much difference to someone who doesn't understand right and wrong, or doesn't know about it at all, doesn't know about their misdeeds at all. Now, the ideal case, I'll just stop presenting momentarily. The ideal case is where you have a person who is able to reflect on themselves. What are the good things that the positive that they've done, and the areas that they can try to improve on. There's always room for improvement. And ideally, that person should be able to do this on a regular, if not daily, basis. And the good thing about doing this on such a regular basis is that they're able to detect their faults. They're able to, becomes a training. They're able to detect, identify their mistakes, and then be in the best position to correct them, to rectify them. And that means that they can only improve. So that would be the ideal situation. And, in our daily life, in our work, so life as a student, for example, there are assessments or appraisals, there's peer reviews. They can help us identify what else we need to do to fulfill the learning outcomes, the standards that are expected of us as employees, as colleagues, etc. But sometimes it's a lot more difficult to understand our roles and our responsibilities as friends or as members of a family, how we're supposed to relate to our friends and family members. Because then there aren't any sort of periodical reviews necessarily. And that's all the more reason why it's important we work with our loved ones on a day-to-day basis. And it makes it all the more important to reflect on ourselves. We want to be a good person, to be able to get along with everyone else. And not just that, to model the right behaviours. At the end of the day, whether we're a son or daughter, brother or sister, a spouse, a grandparent or grandchild, the idea is that I suppose these could be a good criteria to apply. Have we modelled the right behaviours that could help the other person, particularly younger people, develop their good ethical character? And if everyone did what I've done, would that make the world a better place? And if the answer is no, then we should stop doing it. Have we helped the other person in terms of what they need to know and learn? In particular, not just school subjects, but in skills for work, but underlying all of that, what's at the foundation of their knowledge and skills is the idea of developing them as a good ethical, their good ethical character. Because it's only when they have such good ethical character, that they're able to, be sort of grow and become a responsible citizen, a member of society, and be able to make a worthwhile contribution to society. That's really important to reflect on. And I think there's a proverb that it's about, it takes a village to raise one child. Everyone can play their part. And the interesting thing about human beings is that no person is an island. We exist in this web of interpersonal relationships. We see people, we're around people every day. And the good thing about this learning from the Exalted Treatise, or Confucian learning generally, is that it helps us be attuned to the impact we have, all the lives that we touch, and it inspires us to model the right behaviours, so that we're able to set a responsible example, to be a good ethical character. Okay. Now, there was another quote. Yeah. And it's sort of hopeful. This was some advice given to Lord Ling of the state of Xing. And obviously, it's comes to us from 2,000 years ago. And his remonstrating official, these were officials who were charged with giving good advice to the ruler, especially counseling him when he has to make these policy decisions and he's not thinking in the right way. So it makes it very clear that it's only human to make a mistake. Who is without errors? Who hasn't made a mistake? To make a mistake is part of being human, but having erred and being capable of correction, well, there is no greater good, no good greater than that. The idea is that, to make a mistake is only human, but being able to correct our mistakes, that is the greatest good that we can achieve. And that's something that is as applicable then as it is now. If we look into our own day-to-day, all the things that we do, all the things that we think and say, how much of that can we improve on? They're worthwhile questions to reflect. And so I think that, to stop presenting. This section is a very critical section. The idea of recognizing that, where we've gone wrong and committing ourselves to change, following through. And by the same token, being aware of the good deeds, learning about all the good deeds that we can possibly do, and again, committing to following through. It's a critical instruction and caution to alert us to, as the start of the next section, these are sort of misdeeds that apply to everyone, that everyone is sort of at risk of being in breach of. So I think that there's a lot to reflect on. In the last few moments today, I would suggest that there are three key areas where you might direct your efforts in terms of accumulating our good deeds. And this sort of came through very clearly when I was revising my notes on Venerable Master's lectures on the Exalted Treatise, and particularly on this sentence. He would emphasize that, yes, accumulating good deeds are very important. They're keys to our good health, good fortune in our life, for our future. But there are three important areas to be mindful of. Some of these you might know. The first area is in relation to our parents and people who have looked after us from the moment that we're born, and who've given us so much throughout our life. And they do this thanklessly. If you talk to many parents, their only hope is for their child to grow up healthy and happy. And it shouldn't be on days like Mother's Day and Father's Day that we think of them. I remember I was traveling in a taxi to the airport recently, and the driver, we were chatting. It was about a 2-hour drive from Toowoomba Airport to from Toowoomba to Brisbane Airport, and we were talking in the car, and he was from India. He had lived in Australia for many years now, and he told me that, when he first arrived, there was Mother's Day. It happened to be in May, and he wasn't sure, why was there a particular day? Obviously, settled in to life in Australia. His children have grown up here, but when his own mother came to visit, and she happened to arrive on Mother's Day, there's all the shops have the signs out, and she wasn't sure, why is there a particular day for us celebrating mothers? And obviously it's a good thing. Says, as people do, they take their mum out for a meal, they surprise her with a gift, etc., and be ultra loving and kind to their mother on that day. But he was saying, in where he comes from, there is no Mother's Day, or Father's Day for that matter. Mother's Day is every day. It's and he said it's part and parcel of being a human being, that you give back, you remember, and you love and are grateful to the people who've raised you, who've sort of contributed so much to you, or the being the way that you are. And that is something that is, on a day-to-day basis. You don't need a special day in the calendar to remind everyone. Obviously, it doesn't hurt, but I thought I was really inspired by that. I thought, wow, this is something that is in everyone, sort of in the blood of every individual in that community. And family is a huge part of so many, you could say, family is a huge part of the lives of so many people in the different parts of the world. Their families bear the burdens of raising the young, of looking after the old, and regardless of whether you're young and old, in every age in between, they provide that mental support, moral support, and that was really when obviously we've had Mother's Day last month, and there's Father's Day obviously coming up, but I thought back to that conversation in the taxi, and the driver from India, who apparently they don't celebrate Mother's Day there. They don't really feel the need to. It's Mother's Day every day, and I think that there's a lot to admire and celebrate about it, having that sort of mindset. So parents are huge. We want to make sure that our parents are cared for. They don't need to worry about us or our health, or or our family or our work, etc. They're not getting any younger, and we certainly should not give them cause for worry. In fact, we should be making sure that they don't worry, that they're happy and in as best the state of health as they can be. The next important subject for our good deeds is teachers. These are all the people who have taught us important things, and particularly when it comes to becoming a good ethical person. So those are the teachers, certainly in terms of the sort of knowledge and skills, but when it comes to being a good person in whatever profession, yes, you remember their advice, but you should ultimately, have respect and follow that advice. I think that's the most practical way of being respectful to our teachers. And to love our parents, be respectful to our teachers. And finally, the last sort of broad subject of our good deeds are all the people who are suffering hardship or illness or difficulty in any way. And that's ultimately to develop our sense of compassion. I think that those three key areas are worth bearing in mind. So you have parents, teachers, and all people who are suffering generally. They're worth bearing in mind, especially in the context of this particular sentence. To know about our faults and to commit to changing them, and to know about good virtue in what we think, say, and do, and committing to practicing that. So I'd like to leave you on that note. And thank you very much for your kind attention. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.